April 1840. 4 years had passed since the walls of Alamo drank Texan blood, and I carried with me the responsibility of every man who could not save in that damn fortress. Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, William Travis. Her names echoed in my mind every time she stepped in San Antonio. But it was not the Alamo who had brought me to the city in that spring. General Lamar had been in charge of inspecting the old Spanish missions south of the city, evaluating their potential to establish advanced military posts. The Republic of Texas needed defensive structures, and those centenary stone buildings offered just that. Thick walls, strategic positions, solid construction. At least that's what the map suggested. The San Jose mission had been the first on my list. Then San Juan Capistrano. Both showed signs of abandonment, but nothing that could not be restored with work and determination. That's when Father Miguel, an elderly Mexican who had remained in San Antonio after our independence, mentioned the "Third, there is another mission," he said in an accent loaded, his eyes avoiding mine. Bad Antigua, bad, problematic. I was interested immediately. Problem-like? He made the sign of the cross. Los Fathers Españoles. Abandonaron my quick, even before the Mexicans. They say something was not right there. Where it is? 5 miles al sur. But, Senor Houston? He touched my arm with trembling fingers. Mior and the sister. This place. In the Bueno. Of course, your words only increased my determination. In 47 years of life, I had learned that the places that most advise us to avoid are exactly those we need to investigate the most. I left the next morning, mounted on Ranger and carrying provisions for 2 days. The trail was poorly defined, serpenting through low bush and limestone fields. San Antonio disappeared behind me gradually, swallowed by the southern wavy landscape of Texas. Around noon, when the sun was relentless over my head, I spotted the first stones. It was not the elegant walls I expected to see. These stones were spread across the floor like broken teeth, covered with moss and erosion. Some still formed recognizable structures, a bow here, a low wall there, but most seemed to have collapsed for decades. Ranger hesitated as we approached. His ears moved nervously, capturing sounds that my ears could not detect. I stroked his neck to calm him down, but noticed that my own breath had become more superficial. The air around the mission was different, more dense, as if carrying weight of centuries. I dismantled and tied a twisted tree about 50 meters from the main structure. He did not protest, actually seemed relieved to maintain distance. I walked slowly toward what was left of the central building. The outer walls still rose at a height of about 12 feet, built with limestone blocks that had resisted at the time better I expected. But there was something wrong with the proportions. The arches were too high, the windows too small, as if the architecture had been designed to keep something inside, or something out. The main entrance was partially blocked by fallen stones, but there was enough room for me to pass. I stopped in the threshold, looking at the darkness of the inside. "Hello?" I shouted. My voice echoed strangely, as if the stone walls absorbed the sound before returning it distorted. No answer. Only the dead echo of my own voice. I entered. The interior was larger than it looked out. The ceiling had collapsed at various points, leaving piles of wreckage on the floor and allowing bundles of sunlight to cut the dim light on dramatic angles. Pigeons had made nests in the exposed beams, and their constant whispers created a sinister soundtrack for my exploitation. But it was not the pigeons that bothered me. It was the silence between his movements. A silence that seemed artificial, as if something was deliberately drowning out other sounds. I advanced carefully, testing each step on the floor covered with rubble. The internal walls still displayed traces of frescoes. Faded saints watched me with empty eyes. Some had been deliberately disfigured, with deep scratches cutting through the painted faces. Vandalism, I muttered to myself. But when I looked more closely, the marks did not look like human tools. They were too long, too deep, as if something with claws had scratched the stone. In the center of the main ship, I found something that made my skin shiver. A stone altar remained intact, but its surface was stained with something dark that time had not been able to erase completely. Around the altar, the stone floor showed strange patterns. No Christian religious symbols, but Something older. Concentric circles with lines that radiated like rays of sunshine, but inverted, as if pulling light inside instead of emitting it. I approached the altar with increasing caution. The dark spots had a metallic smell that still persisted after decades. Blood. A lot of blood. Jesus Christ, I whispered, and my voice echoed strangely, as if other voices had whispered with me. It was then that I heard the steps. They did not come from a specific direction. They seemed to echo their own walls, a slow, deliberate pace of leather sandals against stone. Step, pause. Step, pause. As someone walking in procession. "Who is there?" I shouted, my hand instinctively going to the revolver on my belt. The steps stopped immediately. The silence that followed was oppressive, as if the whole air had been sucked from the place. Then I heard the corner. It started low, almost imperceptible, a Gregorian melody that seemed to come from far away. Male voices in harmony, singing in Latin words that I could not distinguish clearly. But there was something wrong with the music. The notes were correct, the appropriate pace, but there was an underlying quality that made my spine freeze. It was as if the singers were in agony. Singing grew gradually, echoing through the rolled ship with a force that challenged the acoustics of the place. And then, distinctly, I heard other voices gathering. Shouted voices, pleaded, cried for mercy. Not in Latin, in Spanish, and something older. I ran to the entrance, but when I reached the threshold, the sounds stopped abruptly. I turned to look back into the mission, and saw something that tested every fiber of my sanity. Translucent figures filled the ship. They were not ghosts in the traditional sense. They were more like visual echoes, impressions left in the air. Franciscan priests in brown habits moved in slow procession around the stained altar. Their faces were circumvented in expressions of horror and despair, and among them, other figures. Tribes Indians I didn't recognize, their faces painted with symbols that seemed to burn in the filtered light. They didn't walk in procession, they danced. A primitive, wild dance around the terrorized priests. In the center of everything, a figure stood out. A middle-aged man in episcopal robes, his mitra episcopal crooked over a head that bled from invisible injuries. He held a crucifix like a gun, shouting Latin words that echoed without sound. And then everyone looked at me. Dozens of translucent eyes fixed on me simultaneously. Some supplicants, other accusers, all charged with the weight of indescribable suffering. "Help us," said a voice that seemed to come from them all at the same time. "Free us." I retreated, stumbled on the loose stones, but could not look away. The figures began to move toward me, their shapes becoming more solid with each step. "I can't," he said with a hoarse voice. "I don't know how." "The blood," said another voice, this clearly one of the priests. "The blood on the altar. It wasn't ours." I looked at the stained altar and understood. The standard around him, the symbols recorded on the stone, the way the figures moved. It was not a Christian ceremony that had happened there. It was something older, darker. "They forced us," continued the priest's voice. "The indigenous people, but they were not common savages. They were something else. They made us participate in rituals that desecrated this sacred place. And now," said a third voice, this rough and guttural, clearly indigenous, "we are stuck between worlds, neither alive nor dead, just waiting." The figures had approached enough so I could see terrible details. The priests showed signs of torture, fingers missing, marked faces, torn garments. The Indians seemed equally tormented but differently, as if they had been possessed by something that had destroyed their souls. "What happened here?" I asked, although part of me did not want to know the answer. The ghostly bishop approached, his figure gaining scary substance. "They came from the north," he said in a voice that echoed like wind in caves. "They weren't like the local tribes. They loved it. Other things, old things. They captured us during Sunday Mass," continued another priest. "They forced us to perform their pagan rituals in this sacred place. They mixed our blood with theirs, on the altar. And when we refused," said the bishop, "they showed us what their gods could do. The Indians' figures fluttered, their faces writhing in anguish. One of them spoke, his voice loaded with remorse. We had no choice. What lived, in the northern caves, promised power in exchange for obedience. But the price was his souls, completed the bishop, and ours too. I looked around the rolled ship with new understanding. This was not just an abandoned building. It was a spiritual prison, a place where souls stuck between worlds awaited release, that could never come. How can I help? I asked, although my voice shook. Tell our story, said the bishop, his figure starting to fade. Don't let this place be forgotten. The truth has power. And keep others away, added one of the priests, until it is purified properly. The figures began to dissipate, their voices echoing more weakly. The evil that created it still exists in the northern caves, still waiting for more souls. And then they disappeared, leaving me alone in the silent ship. I remained motionless for several minutes, processing what I'd witnessed. My rational mind struggled to find explanations. Hallucinations caused by heat, toxic gases emanating from old stones, light tricks, and shadow. But my heart knew the truth. He had witnessed something beyond normal human understanding. I left the mission with slow steps, my eyes constantly checking the shadows. Ranger welcomed me with a low religion of relief, as if he also knew I had escaped something terrible. I set up and rode back to San Antonio without looking back, but I could feel invisible eyes watching me until the ruins were out of sight. That night at the hotel in San Antonio, I wrote my official report to General Lamar. I recommended that the mission be considered structurally insecure and inappropriate for military use. I didn't mention what I had really experienced, but I also wrote another report, this to my own files, a complete account of events preserved for some future purpose. 2 days later, I discreetly consulted Father Miguel about the northern caves. His face paled. If, he said softly, las cuevas of Anti-Udes, los indios locales, never van allá. Dicen that something malo lives in depths. How long? Since before the Españols. Since before cualquier human memoria. I never returned to that mission. From time to time, over the years, I heard rumors about the area. Travelers who have gotten lost, exploits who have never returned, strange sounds echoing from the ruins at night. I have always discouraged any official investigation. Some places are better left alone. Texas is a young land, but built on very old foundations. Not everything preceded our arrival disappeared over time. Some presences remain, prey between what was and what could have been. That afternoon on the abandoned mission, I learned that the story is not only about events that happened, it is also about events that continue to happen, echoing through the centuries in places where the veil between the worlds is thinner, and sometimes if we hear closely, we can still hear your voices asking for peace that it can never come. If reports like this arouse their curiosity over the hidden mysteries in our history, there are others that value the preservation of these truths. The past is not dead. He just waits for the right ears for his stories. And perhaps by sharing these accounts we can honor both the living and those who remain stuck between the worlds.